Hello, family. Welcome back to JFK Today, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I'm your host, Janaea Future Khan, champ-yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. So you know we got to talk about that whole Trump-Musk live. Just losers. But there's something really important too, and it lines up with everything we've been talking about. And that is, what is fueling the so-called trans war, the war against trans people? Like, what is the actual body of evidence justifying all of these weird, random claims? But before we get into that, a quick note, right? The virus that never left, COVID, you know that it has been going through its ebbs and flows, but has never, ever, ever stopped terrorizing us and our communities. If you're like me and you're due for a vaccine, you might want to consider holding off until the fall because they are dropping some hot shit. That's right. That's what the experts say. It's supposed to be very, very effective, much more effective in protecting us against the strains of today and the strains of tomorrow. So if you already have one, because you've been very responsible, do not despair. We know that shit wears off in a couple of months. So let me be your guinea pig. We. Okay, so I watched that Trump and Musk live so that you didn't have to. Regardless of our personal takes on these two people, right? If we're just looking at it, these are two of the most influential people in the world. One is the richest man in the world, and the other is a somewhat rich person, bloviated. I think the wealth is but was a former president and could potentially be our next president. And I use the "our" very loosely. Oh my God. But they did a live together on Elon Musk's X, which was formerly Twitter, okay? And apparently, you know this guy blows up his numbers, just like Trump does his wealth. But apparently nearly 70 million people paid attention to it. I don't know if I trust that fully, but they certainly weren't there in the live when it happened because that shit was the most rickety, raggedy thing. It kept crashing. They were 45 minutes late because they could not handle anything. Because remember when Elon Musk completely fired everyone and then bitched and moaned about how he was all about free speech, but then made cis a slur? Cis. C-I-S. That's the slur. That is the slur. Well, he's running around talking about, I care about this and that. All right. So anyway, you didn't miss anything. It was just, honestly, okay. This is, if I had to qualify very, very quickly, if I had to tell you what that Musk and Trump live actually was, it was two dumb bitches saying exactly to each other over and over again for 2 hours. That's all that live was. They just lied. It was ultimately, they were a meme, which is what I just referenced. And I know that they were a meme. They're a meme on two levels, not because that is a very fun internet kind of joke, but on the other level, which is meme because it's a me, and that's all they care about. Me. My punny honeys will get me. My punny loving people will understand and laugh at that very nerdy joke. You're welcome. Or maybe just like, please come to my house so that I'm not the only word nerd. Anyway. It's really interesting because if you recall, Elon Musk, who is behind Tesla and who ran on this whole I care about the climate campaign, is now sitting across from one of the biggest proponents of fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry that we currently have. That is one of the ways that he is running against Kamala Harris by saying, I'm the guy who cares about oil. I'm the one who cares about big oil. I'm going to bring you back your big, big jobs so that you can have your big, big life. Right. Okay. So they both made largely fact-free assertions about global heating, right? This is including the rising sea levels. What Trump referred to this moment of global warming as opportunities for more oceanfront property. I just need you to hear that. Right? And that there was no urgent need to cut carbon emissions, right? Just remember that the carbon emissions that we're talking about are the things that are leading to all of these natural disasters. In fact, I read something recently that said that we can't call natural disasters anymore because they're actually not. The vast majority of them are caused by this rapidly warming planet. So Donald Trump, in that live, where he's sitting across from Elon Musk, one simple bitch and another simple bitch, Donald Trump called the climate crisis a hoax. He said it was a disgrace that Biden's administration did not open up the vast Arctic wilderness in Alaska for oil drilling. And then he claimed baselessly that farmers were having to give up their cattle because of climate edicts and that a far greater threat is posed by the prospect of nuclear war. This is one of the things that he pondered. This is a quote. "The one thing that I don't understand," I'm like, the one thing, nigga? Anyway, sorry. "The one thing that I don't understand is that people talk about global warming or they talk about climate change, but they never talk about nuclear warming." Trump pondered during the exchange. You know, if I had to explain what Donald Trump was, it would be like a nuclear plant running on coal. That is essentially who that person is. Okay. So this is, I'm going to give you a quote because I'd rather pull it from the experts here. So Bill McKibben is a veteran climate activist and one of the co-founders of 350.org. This is what he had to say about it. He said, "They spelunked." You know, I got to tell you, just before I go in there, that we don't often talk about the contributions of white people on this planet because, you know, all the stuff, all the colonization or whatever. But words like rat's ass, right, or spelunked, chef's kiss, well done. Those are great and fun words that just describe something exactly as it is. When I hear a white person say, "I don't give a rat's ass," I'm amped. I'm ready to go to war. Let's go. Anyway, so McKibben says they spelunked down into entirely new levels of stupidity. I love that, right? And then he said it was the dumbest climate conversation of all time. He goes on to say this. "The damaging impacts of climate change, and in particular from more extreme..." Oh, no, sorry. This quote here is from Michael Mann. He's a leading climate scientist and author. I had to pull out a couple just so you knew how dumb this was. So this is what Michael Mann has to say. "The damaging impacts of climate change, and in particular from more extreme weather events such as wildfires, floods, heat waves, more intense hurricanes, are actually in many respects exceeding the predictions made just a decade ago." He then goes on to say, "It is sad that Elon Musk has become a climate change denier, but that's what he is. He's literally denying what the science has to say here." And I think that the idea of Elon Musk leading up to this point versus the reality of what he is can no longer be minimized. It was a ruse. It was a ruse. It was a game. It was a ploy. Whatever was going to get him liked ultimately is what he did and what he said. But the cars themselves, this whole Tesla as an entity, was really just about money. And that in those initial investments were obviously made because of his family's mining wealth. But anyway, everything that he is now and everything that he's saying now, those are the things. Those are the facts. Those are the things that matter. Elon Musk is not a climate change hero. He's not someone ahead of the curve. He is a climate change denier who is devolving as we speak, because it's right now the only thing that's important to him. And really the only thing that can be important to you when you are the richest man on the planet is continuing to get richer. So what should our takeaways be from this moment? This is Trump is fucking flailing right now. Like this, I mean, flailing. Think about this. You might not have known, I didn't want to mention it, but now it's got to come up. You know I love bringing things full circle. So this is the second live stream that Trump has been on. One that you might not have heard of is that he was on a stream platform called Kick, which is where everyone who gets banned from Twitch goes because they either want to be naked, want to talk about weird shit, or are just straight up bigots. So he was recently on a live stream with a kid named Aiden Ross. Aiden Ross is somebody who is a dangerously stupid 20-something-year-old. And honestly, I low-key know that that's a bit redundant because sometimes when you're that age, but what makes him dangerously stupid is how many ears of young people he has. And if you've been listening to some of these episodes, you know that I have discussed how casually and how freely far-right extremism is being normalized across the manosphere. And we've seen Logan Paul, for example, come out and say that he's pro-Trump, a loser named Sneeko, who's very, very anti-trans, and then Aiden Ross. So Aiden Ross hosted Donald Trump on his stream. That means that Donald Trump went to a 20-something-year-old's whatever to stream, to live stream aren't you running a presidential race? Like, aren't you busy, nigga? Like, what the fuck are, sorry, sorry, I just remembered, I'm trying not, it's like swearing is good, right? But I was really about to forget that I was doing a podcast for a second. But aren't you busy? Like, don't you have things to do? What you can see here, though, is why do streamers care so much about Donald Trump? And remember that Aiden Ross got kicked off of Twitch, and he has a lot to say about trans people, for example. And you'll really hear the same thing. You heard it from Logan Paul, Sneeko, Aiden Ross. These are names you don't need to know, but I do. And all of it, what trans people are doing to children. What trans people are doing to children, it's disgusting. What trans people are doing to children is disgusting. Yeah, but it shouldn't be about children. So he said that. So then you have two idiots, and there seems to be a theme right now with live streams with just two idiots, one of them being Donald Trump, just yapping to each other about nonsense. But it begs the question, where do these ideas about trans people and children come from? We know that there's two popular thoughts when it comes to transphobia right now. One is men, so-called men in women's sports, and the other is when it comes to children. And you'll hear the way that people articulate their transphobia, right? When it's not confusion or concern or ignorance or naivete, you will hear them say, well, it shouldn't be happening to kids, or I think that children shouldn't be able to make those decisions. Or you'll hear, well, I just don't think that men should be in women's sports. And it's specifically about physical combat sports, right? Let's get really, really clear about that. If you've heard some of the other episodes, you know that I've referenced Imane Khalif, who is a boxer that was accused of being male when she was in fact not. So that was the story of the day. But right before that, right, and I want to say right before that, in internet years, which is seconds, but anyway, some of you might have heard of a UFC fighter named Fallon Fox. Fallon Fox is a trans woman. She did compete as a male before she transitioned into a woman and then tried to compete on that scale. She won some, she lost some, but it didn't matter. So anyway, I'm like living my black life, just my black free life, just scrolling online, researching comedians, because that's what I do in my spare time. I research things. And here's this comedian I've come across several times, right? Just this guy, he's kind of like a wannabe edgelord. I'm like, just get the hair plugs. Like, just get the transplant. You do not need to be this bitter. Anyway, he brought up Fallon Fox, and he was just like, but then he's like, I don't care about trans issues. Do what you want. Live your life. Do what you want. But then I saw that she got into the ring, and she was going to beat up this woman, and she looked like a, gorilla, and da-da-da. It's interesting. Because I got to tell you, it's very interesting for me to hear that men are suddenly concerned that women are getting beaten up by men. Like, let's just accept their argument for a second, right? Rather than just refute it. It's interesting that they're suddenly concerned with men beating up women. They've never mentioned it before. And if you want any kind of proof that trans women are in fact women, it's that all of a sudden these men have a problem with what she's doing. Because they certainly don't have a problem with what men want to do with themselves every other day of the week. They're certainly not running around running campaigns against domestic violence. So let's just put that baby in a corner, because we know that that's nonsense. We know that that's not real. So what about the children? If I'm thinking of the Simpsons character, won't somebody please think of the children? That's come up a number of times, and not all of it has been fueled by extremism or bigotry. I have had conversations with smart people who are in the LGBTQ spectrum who have said, yeah, but I just don't think that we should be pushing our agenda. I just don't think that young people should be able to make those kinds of decisions with their bodies. They also have said things like, puberty blockers are dangerous things. We should not be using them. I had to realize two things. One, we have not done a great job about talking about these things out in the open, largely because we're learning as we go. And the data coming in is largely new because we were denied before that. You couldn't just transition. Didn't anybody read Stone Butch Blues? Like, You couldn't just get out there and be like, all right, this is what I am now. People were doing it anyway in our communities, but this is the first time that we can actualize in a way that makes sense. And the science is supportive of that. So where did these ideas come from? Because we know just one casual search, and you know that puberty blockers are not permanent. In fact, what they do is enable young people to take their time with those decisions while their body does not rage against them, right? It gives you a chance to think things through. So what is the actual problem? All right. Where does it come from? So this really pisses me off, okay? Because first of all, let me just say to all the, please just think of the children. It's fascinating to me. It is fascinating to me that in this age, you're concerned about transgender issues and children as like the crux of what children need to be concerned with now. As in, if we defeat transgenderism, we save the children. I find that very interesting because this is from the same subset of people who do not care about climate change, who don't give a fuck about school shootings, who don't care about child poverty, who don't care about friggin' healthcare, accessible healthcare, public education. These are the same people who are saying that transgender issues are the key problem, right, in our generation. It's wild to me because rather than worry about asbestos in the walls or lead in the water, you're worried about glitter and pastels. That would be like if we were all in the Hunger Games, right? And rather than overthrow the system that is oppressing everybody, you decide that you're going to run a campaign on people who die because vending machines fall on them. It doesn't make sense, does it? It doesn't make sense. So anyway, I'm supposed to take you seriously? I'm supposed to take you seriously? I'm sorry, I don't think so. So why am I bringing this up in this particular moment? A, it's always good to peel it back, but B, there's a big court case coming up, all right? So here are some of the questions that are leading us up into this big court case, which is the United States versus Skirmity. It's what a gangster word. I mean, they're probably on the other side. I probably wouldn't like but that's a gangster last name. Skirmity? Okay. So it's been brought forward by the Biden administration to challenge a ban in Tennessee on gender-affirming care for adolescents that all American medical organizations support. So Tennessee is one of some 24 states that have passed laws limiting gender-affirming care for young people, right? So I want you to, these are some of the questions going in. Who should decide what medical care a person receives? Should it be patients and their families with doctors and clinicians using, guidelines developed by leading experts in the world, right? Based on current scientific knowledge and treatment practice, right? Or does the Constitution allow lawmakers to pretend that they live in your home and tell you exactly what you should do and how you should do it, what you should do with your body, what you should do with your child's body, and what that child should do with their own body? It's really one or the other. It's really one or the other. And it's wild to me, remember we talked about that shoehorn thing, that suddenly the people who talk about libertarianism and wanting small government and who wants to erase federal oversight and federal realization in a democracy are suddenly pro get the lawmakers in our homes, let them tell us what to do. God, sometimes it's just so upsetting because there's like 8 brain cells between the whole cadre and they're having such an influence. But anyway, okay. So the appeal argues that these bans, right, these gender-affirming care bans, are an unconstitutional form of sex discrimination. They forbade long-use treatments for transgender adolescents that are also given to children who are not transgender for different reasons. So what that means is that there's already a precedent. There are already some young people who receive that kind of care for other medical issues or other medical reasons, but not trans reasons, not for the transgenders, right? So this Tennessee law, the Tennessee law called the Protecting Children from Gender Mutilation Act, it's as ridiculous as it sounds. It prohibits the use of puberty blocker medications for transgender adolescents, but it permits them for children who go into puberty at an early age. I just want you to hear what I just said. Just take that in. It's not okay for trans adolescents, but for other children who go into puberty early. So that means you know that it's not dangerous. Do you understand? Like when we actually look at this, when we actually look at the facts, it's just a bunch of bullshit, right? I woke up on one this morning. Some of you, there's some personal stuff going on. So I was like, this is going somewhere. This frustration is going somewhere, right? Let's get into more of what it does. It bans the use of sex hormones like testosterone in transgender adolescents, but allows it for other health issues, such as children assigned male at birth. That means that if you were a child, if you're a person who were assigned male at birth, let's say you have extremely low testosterone, for example, they'll give you some. Again, it refutes the idea that this is something dangerous for young people. It bans gender-affirming surgeries for transgender adolescents. For the record, right, because this is a big concern for some people, not everybody is a, bloviated bigot, they're extremely rare. I mean, they're so unbelievably rare. It harkens back to the vending machine issue. It'd be like, instead of worried about death by vending machines falling on you, it's death by shoving your arm into the vending machine, getting stuck there, and then slowly starving to death. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous to form any kind of campaign or concern around that, right? They're extremely rare. But it allows similar surgical procedures that affirm the sex of a child, right? Whatever sex they're assigned at birth, even on infants who are intersex, even though we know that intersex people have again and again and again said, this is actual mutilation. Let me be who I am. Biodiversity is normal in every kind of life, in every kind of life form. Let me be who I am and let me figure it out for myself. But we don't care about those people. No, they can fuck right off. So what did surprise me in 2020 with the Supreme Court, particularly surprising given its extremely conservative majority, it was perhaps less realized then. No, it was just as realized then. Anyway, they ruled somewhat, actually not somewhat, they ruled favorably, right? They decided that differential treatment of transgender and gay people is impermissible under civil rights law. Gorsuch said it is impossible, right? And this is a guy I cannot stand. Like, I don't like his face. I don't like his face. He says it is impossible to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating against that individual based on sex. So even one of the most extreme right, dickhead, hyper-conservative, bought and paid for Supreme Court justices could not refute the innumerable contradictions in the application of care, right? So let's just fast forward, because right now lawyers they're gonna try to go after it. There's a bunch of lawyers in favor of the ban, but they're taking a sharply different approach. In a strike, this is I got from the New York Times, in a striking echo of arguments used to challenge medical abortion. So remember that you might have heard me say something several episodes ago, that we lost trans rights when we lost abortion rights, that it wasn't about abortion, it was about body autonomy, and these things overlapped. If you lose one, you lose the other. The right understands that. And so the justifications to make medical abortions a contested issue, and in some cases a banned one, they are now using to try to apply to reverse the decision on gender-affirming care here, right? So let me say that again from the New York Times. In a striking echo of the arguments used to challenge medical abortion, they have asserted, against the consensus of the mainstream medical science, right, that the standard treatments for transgender children are not based in evidence and represent a grave risk to the health and well-being of young people. That's a bunch of bullshit. But this argument, right, for bans has been supercharged by this moment. This time where we're seeing, won't somebody please think of the children? Or, men are beating up women. What are we gonna do? Right? It's being supercharged. And we all know that so much of what happens in a court of law has to do with what is culturally happening outside of it. So really quickly, I want to get into the people who are directly responsible for this moment. And I'm not talking about the pundits or the losers or the far right or anything. I mean, they say that it's scientific. When they quote their nonsense, they say that it's scientific. It's a scientific journal, or the science says this. Well, where does that come from? The Cass report. It comes from the Cass report. And there's another loser named Meyer that we'll get into, right? Because the bigots were always there. Transgenderism, transgender people, these were not lightning rod issues a few years ago. We've discussed this. So what is giving them currently a body of work? Like, who is giving them a body of work to try to justify this? So, I was going to say this how, right? But there's a Cass report that is 300, pages long, right? And it is one of the most loosely threaded together arguments against gender-affirming care that I've ever seen. So Cass is a retired pediatrician, right? She led Britain's Pediatric Medical Association, but has no direct experience with gender care. She undertook a years-long review of the scientific literature that, underscores or undergirds modern gender-affirming care for children, right? And then looked at an examination of records of thousands of children who had received this care from the NHS, right? So this is somebody who has no previous experience, who decides, I'm going to take all this body of work and then I'm going to do what I want with it. So what actually came up? Like, what happened? Okay. So if you were to take a look at it, which I did, if you were going to just pick it up and take a look at it, you would know, like, you would think to yourself, if you're a normal person, if you had limited knowledge of trans healthcare, you would think that some of it was reasonable, right? It's got statements of concern for the well-being of young people, insists that the current standards of care are built on, and this is a quote from the thing, remarkably weak evidence, right? That's the end quote. And that children seeking gender-affirming care, this is another quote, deserve very much better, right? It's like, is this Winnie the Pooh? Like, very much better? Okay, whatever. Okay. But here's the problem with the report. It's full of contradictions, just like these legal arguments, while maintaining that for some, the best outcomes will be transition. It nevertheless effectively recommends, and this is from the New York Times, that the NHS abandon the guidelines embraced by major mainstream medical associations and restrict the use of medications that have been offered for decades to adolescents across the globe, with vanishingly few negative side effects or regrets. Do you want to know what this whole case is based on? One person, right? And you've heard J.K. Rowling talk about this. There's another loser I forgot to mention. They brought up one person and they say, well, this one person regretted it. And yes, there was one individual, right, who transitioned and then was like, ooh, I made a mistake. I wish that I had not taken testosterone and I wish that I had not had top surgery. Again, arm in the vending machine. Arm in the vending machine. First of all, let's just consider the fact that trans people make up less than 1% of the population in America, right? So there's no trans takeover. This would be a much better country if that were in fact the case. As annoying as trans people are, right? And we can be, but that's the point. We're just thorns in your side until you do the right thing. And far better looking, far happier, far more efficient, far better looking. Anyway, one person did this. One person did this once and said, this was a mistake. I wish that didn't happen. And they have been running ragged with it since. So that was the Bell case, right? And it stoked already what was a climate of transphobia in Britain. Now, this matters because, as we've discussed, Britain and America, they work hand in hand. I would say Israel, but they do have a thing for letting pedophiles and sex offenders into their country. They have a thing where they're like, oh, you guys are welcome here. So that's weird. That is a factual thing, for the record. You could look that up. It's very odd. So that's probably the only place where they're not fully aligned. Anyway, Britain and America are working hand in hand in this. So that is where J.K. Rowling got this idea with that this should be an issue for women's groups because there's this transgender agenda, which is a bit redundant, for the record. Anyway, so her thing is, right, this is what she says, and this is what many people believe, that women are endangered and children are endangered, especially when they're born as girls, because they're being seduced, often while suffering from serious mental illness, right? By what they call, and this has been appropriated by the bigots, gender ideology into believing they are transgender boys, okay? So this is where Cass comes in. She writes this report that's full of holes and contradictions, and that becomes the thing, that becomes the body of work that people are referencing to say, this is why we can argue this in this court of law. And this is what people are using to justify abuses against people like Fallon Fox, who is now a retired UFC fighter, or Imran Khalif. One thing I love is knowing where the bullshit comes from and who writes it, because it's always from somebody and it's always from somewhere. And once you start peeling back the layers, it's hollow inside. But if we aren't sort of revealing it, it has the same kind of Wizard of Oz effect before you pull the curtain back. It's just a guy, just a little guy who had some insecurities and had to figure something out to make himself feel really big. I mean, it was really and truly, it was a premonition for social media as we know it, right? That's literally it. But I wanted us to remove some of that. And, there was another report in 1979 that I'm not going to get into with this guy, John Meyer, right? That also said that sex assignment, that's what they called it again, sex reassignment was a problem. But I just want to say this, and then we gotta wrap, right? But peep this. This is just in case you're like, well, that's one body of evidence. Do you have another? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I do. You know that I love twos. Anyway, so this is the thing. Meyer's findings, they say, were striking. Just one person, similar to the Bell case. So he goes through all this. He does this thing with 50 people back in 1979. Only one person, just one person, right? A transgender man, just like a man. Sorry, no, that's not funny. Okay. It is actually funny, but it's not okay. It's one of the two. It's neither. I'm just going to keep going. Just one person, a transgender man, regretted part of his surgery known as phalloplasty, and after major complications. And it wasn't that he regretted the phalloplasty, it was the major complications. And make some dicks, okay? Put the science into making dicks. What cis man is not happy? Like, what guy is like, I am thrilled with what I got working on now? We're taking chunks off of people's legs, chunks off of their arms. It's a very involved, multi-layered process, and it just might fall off. So why don't we make some scientific advancements for dicks? We live in a dick-centric society, apparently, so go for it. Go for it. All these fucking men are worried about trans women in sports. What you should be worried about is how fucking hot they are. Imagine what happens when your girlfriend realizes that she could get her entire to-do list done and have somebody to go to the grocery store and get dick down at 9 p.m. for those trans women who want to keep it. I'm just saying, put shit in perspective. Anyway, only one person regretted it. The article, so this is back to John Mayer, the article also surveyed other research in the field, finding similar results. This is the conclusion. Patients were pleased with their treatment and had few regrets about their choice. This is back in 1979, but rather than measure that, Meyer measured, right, whether or not people who'd received this treatment had improved on what he called, quote unquote, objective measures, right? So were they less likely to be arrested? Were they more likely to hold down a job? Were they more likely to be in a heterosexual marriage and less likely to need psychiatric care? In other words, right, did sex reassignment make them more like the kind of citizen society valued most? His unequivocal conclusion was no. Do you see how stupid that is? First of all, he wasn't looking at economic indicators for employment or the psychological effects of just living in this world in a crumbling infrastructure. No. Did they become more likely to be, I don't know, shills for corporations, corporate shills and losers and hacks? And the answer was no. And I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, that's awesome. They stayed rad. Anyway, so I wanted to just create a little more scaffolding for this argument that we've been having and the lies and the myths that surround transgender and like issues and transphobia, because it is just a value add across the board, and we have been made to chase a phantom issue, right? If you keep us pointing the finger at each other, we're never pointing the finger up at the actual powers that be that are shaping our, honestly, low-key, kind of shitty experience of society right now. So with that, on to the next. Let's hit the voicemails for that question of the day.
Hey, Future. What was your favorite book when you were 6 years old?
That's so cute. What was my favorite book? I read, there was an encyclopedia in my little tiny the Catholic elementary school library called St. William's that closed down before I could finish it. And it had very few books. But one was, because it was I was in kindergarten or something like that. Anyway, I had an encyclopedia of dogs. And I read the whole thing. So even today, I can look at a dog breed and know what breed of dog it is and what their temperaments are like and what kind of physical issues they might have, because we're wonderful people, humans, but we could be a little bit monstrous, and we'll be like, we like this trait. Who cares if they're now more likely to get cancer because we've eliminated biodiversity? Anyway, super cute breeds, though. So what a great question. Ooh, I actually just want to hear that little person's voice over and over and over again. What a great way to wrap this app. So you know what? I think that's it, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to JFK Today. It means the world to me. This show is a labor of love. New episodes are dropping 4 times a week. Available on Spotify and Apple and everywhere pods are. Right. Go ahead and give us a little review or a little follow on Apple and Spotify. I'd be happy for it. Don't forget to send your voice note questions to jfktodayshow@gmail.com. Shout out to KR and the JFK team, which is just us. And shout out to you, the listeners, who make it all possible. Peace.